Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into the weeds on a fascinating and pretty specific area of finance. You've brought some incredibly detailed sources, including parts of an Arabic Sharia standard, Warkia Korean Sitaneo Dade, from
That's right. And our mission really is to unpack Tawarruq. It's a concept that's absolutely central to Islamic finance. We'll define it, sure, but also crucially distinguish it from something else it tries hard not to be, and then, get into the really strict conditions needed for it to be Sharia compliant.
Okay, sounds like a plan. So the goal for you listening is to walk away with a clear kind of concise grasp of what Tawarruq actually is, how it works structurally, and maybe why the rules around it are so specific. Think of it as your shortcut to getting up to speed on this. So Tawarruq, at its heart, it's about getting liquidity, right? Getting cash. But it's clearly not just any way of getting cash. Can you maybe walk us through the basic idea and, importantly, how it steers clear of this other concept, Bayalina?
Absolutely. And the sources actually tackle Bay'al-Ina first to set the stage. Basically, Bay'al-Ina is when you buy something on deferred payment terms and then immediately sell it right back to the person you just bought it from, but for a lower price, paid in cash right now.
Ah, okay. So like a loop. Buy high on credit, sell low for cash, back to the same person. I can see why that might be problematic.
Exactly. It looks a lot like a loan with interest hidden inside the transaction. Islamic finance generally prohibits that.
Right. So knowing that's the setup to avoid, how does Tawarruq manage to provide liquidity differently?
Okay, so Tawarruq, as these sources define it, also starts with buying a commodity on deferred terms. That could be, a straightforward negotiated sale or often through what's called a murabaha contract.
Urabaha, that's the cost plus profit sale, right?
Yeah.
Where the institution buys something and sells it to the client at an agreed markup.
Precisely. So the purchase happens, but here's the absolute key difference. The person who bought it then sells that commodity on, but to a third party, someone completely separate from the original seller.
A third party.
Okay.
And they sell it to that third party for cash, received immediately. So the end result is the person gets the cash liquidity they needed.
Got it. So that third party is the circuit breaker, preventing the direct loop back to the original seller that we saw in Bialina. Who typically does these Tawarruq operations? Is it individuals or?
Well, the standard is quite clear. It can be either the customer, the Arabic term is skelo, or the financial institution itself, a seth. And whoever is doing it to get the liquidity is called the mutawarriq.
Mutawarriq.
Okay. So for a customer, it means, they buy something, say, from the Islamic bank, delay the payment, then they turn around and sell that item to someone else entirely to get cash now.
Right.
And for the institution, it could mean they buy an asset from, say, a customer or even another institution, again, on deferred terms, and then they sell it to a third party to get liquidity for their own operational needs.
That's interesting. So institutions can use it too, but I remember you saying the sources put a restriction on that straight away. Yes, a very important one. It states that an Islamic institution must not carry out a Tawarruq transaction for a conventional bank if it knows, or strongly suspects, that the cash generated will be used for interest-based lending.
Ah, okay, so the use of the funds matters too. It has to stay within Sharia-compliant activities.
Exactly. It highlights that underlying principle, the purpose matters.
That really helps clarify who uses it and that initial significant restriction. Now let's dive into these conditions for validity. A-O-V-O-K. You mentioned they're really detailed. Why so many rules? Why the precision?
Well, that's a great question. It really boils down to ensuring the transaction is genuine in substance, not just form. It's about making sure it truly adheres to Sharia principles and isn't just, a clever way to structure something that's essentially like an interest-bearing loan. The details are the safeguards.
Okay, safeguards. Let's start with the basic then. What about the commodity itself and the first contract, the purchase?
Right. So first off, all the standard Sharia requirements for a valid sale contract have to be met for that initial purchase. Crucially, the commodity has to actually exist. You can't sell something that isn't there. And the sellers say the institution must own it before they sell it to the mutawarriq, the person seeking cash.
Own it before selling. No selling
Yeah.
short, basically.
Exactly. And if there's any kind of binding promise involved, like a promise to purchase, it can only be binding on one side, not both, to maintain flexibility.
Okay, makes sense. Now, a big one you hinted at. What kind of commodities are we talking about? Are there things that are off limits?
Yes, very explicitly. The sources state the commodity used in Tawarruq cannot be gold, silver, or any kind of currency.
No money, basically.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, it's to prevent what could easily become just trading money for money across time, which directly involves the prohibition of riba, or interest. Using a real non-monetary commodity is key. Plus, the commodity needs to be specifically identified. You need to know exactly what's being bought and sold, maybe through serial numbers or a clear description if it's, say, a batch of goods.
So it has to be a tangible, identifiable good, not currency. That forces a real trade.
Yeah.
What if the item isn't right there when they sign the contract? Like it's at a warehouse somewhere.
Good point. If it's not physically present, the customer must get all the details, a full description, the model, the quantity, and crucially, its exact location. The sources even mention a preference for the commodity being local, likely to make inspection and possession easier.
Right, easier to verify it's real. And that brings us neatly to possession. The sources talk about actual versus constructive possession. What's the difference there? What does it matter?
This is really vital for understanding the seriousness of the transfer. Actual possession, Hakatan, is straightforward physically taking control of the item, holding it, having it delivered to your space.
Okay, physical control.
Constructive possession, Huckman, is a bit more subtle but just as important. It means the buyer has the genuine ability to take physical possession whenever they want. Like, they have the keys, the access codes, the documents, and there are no legal or procedural hurdles stopping them from just going and getting it. The seller has effectively yielded control.
I see. So even if they don't immediately move it, they could. The power has shifted.
Precisely. It ensures that ownership and the associated risk and rights have truly transferred. It's not just paperwork. It's about real control passing hands.
This all feels geared towards making sure it's not just a sham transaction, like you said. So if that real transfer is key for the first sale, how does that carry through to the second sale, the sale to the third party? Are there rules there to stop it, I don't know, somehow looping back indirectly?
Absolutely. The rules are just as strict for the second leg. The sale must be to a genuine third party. It absolutely cannot go back to the original seller. Not through some side deal, not as a condition hidden in the contract, not even if it's just the usual way things are done.
No winks and nods.
No winks and nods. And there must be zero link, whether in the text, by custom, or just how the whole process is set up between that first purchase contract and the second sale contract that would somehow stop the customer from actually taking possession if they wanted to.
So the customer's right to possess and then sell freely to anyone, except the original seller, has to be totally unimpeded.
Exactly. Their independence is paramount at that stage.
Does that independence extend to who actually does the selling for them? Like, can the bank that sold them the item initially help them sell it on?
Another crucial point. Generally, no. The customer must not appoint the institution they bought from or any agent of that institution to sell the commodity for them. And flipping that, the institution must not act as the agent selling on the customer's behalf.
Okay, so total separation there too. But you mentioned an exception.
Yes, a very narrow one. If the actual laws or regulations of the place prevent the customer from selling the commodity themselves, maybe it requires a specific license they don't have, then, and only then, can agency be used. But even in that case, it's only allowed after the customer has already achieved that actual or constructive possession we talked about.
Right, so possession first, then agency only if absolutely legally necessary.
Yeah.
The default is always customer independence.
Precisely. And the institution can't even, pre-arrange an agent for the customer. The customer has to find their own agent if they use one, and that agent cannot be the institution. In fact, the institution's role is simply to give the customer all the info they need, documents, location details, so they can sell it independently.
Wow, okay. The layers of rules to ensure separation and genuine transactions are really quite something. Now, connecting this back, you mentioned institutions can also use Tawarruq for their own liquidity. The sources give guidance on that too, right? It's not like their primary business model.
Not at all. And this is a really critical point about the the spirit behind allowing Tawarruq. The standard is very clear. Tawarruq is not meant to be seen as a primary investment tool or a standard way of financing things for institutions. It's permitted really only out of necessity. And even then, only if all those strict conditions we just went through are met.
Okay, necessity. So it's not the first tool they should reach for if they want to fund a project or expand.
Exactly. Institutions are actually encouraged not to rely on Tawarruq. They should be actively trying to use other Shari'ah-compliant methods first, like mudaraba, profit-sharing partnerships, musharaka, joint ventures, IJRA, leasing, actual investment and financing structures. Tawarruq's use should be limited to specific pressing situations, like needing to cover an unexpected deficit, dealing with a sudden liquidity crunch, maybe preventing losing key customers because they can't meet demands, or stopping their operations from grinding to a halt.
So it's more like a backup generator than the main power
Yes,
supply,
okay.
a contingency.
That's a great analogy. It's a contingency tool, a measure of last resort, not the preferred way to raise capital day to day.
That really frames it differently. And what about agency when an institution is doing Tawarruq for itself? Do they have to sell the commodity themselves too?
Generally, yes, they should avoid appointing an agent to sell it for them when they are the mutawarik. However, the sources do make a small allowance. They say there's no issue with using the services of, independent brokers to help find a buyer in the market. That's seen as different from appointing a formal agent who acts on their behalf.
Okay, using a broker is fine, but direct agency is discouraged even for themselves. The emphasis on direct involvement persists.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive into Tawarruq. We've really unpacked it, haven't we? We've seen it's this very specific, highly regulated way to get liquidity in Islamic finance, and crucially different from Bayalina because of that mandatory third party.
Yes, that third party is key. And the conditions. Wow. They are just incredibly detailed, all aimed, it seems, at ensuring there's a real transfer of ownership, a genuine transaction happening. From, the type of commodity, no gold or silver, right down to the nitty-gritty of possession and making sure the original seller is kept completely out of the second sale.
It really makes you think, though, the strictness, this insistence on actual ownership, on separating the steps, on avoiding certain structures, even if they achieve a similar financial outcome. What does that tell us about the core values or perhaps the foundational principles underpinning this type of finance? Especially when you contrast it with maybe more conventional financial approaches you see every day, which might prioritize efficiency or the end result over the specific form.
That's a really interesting question to leave us with. The why behind the what's. Something for all of you to chew on. We certainly hope this deep dive has given you a much clearer, more robust understanding of Tawarruq and why it's structured the way it is. Until next time, keep digging for those nuggets of knowledge.